Okay.
Okay.
So, hi everyone. I've worked with quite a few of you already, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Riya Sogani, and I was one of the outreachy interns at Oppia for this round of outreachy. And the project that I did was conducting user studies on target students, and I'm here to talk about my experience. And also, just a heads up, I will be taking questions towards the end, but in case anyone has anything that they want to ask me before that, then just feel free to unmute yourselves and let me know. So, before I get started, I would like to thank both of my mentors who actually aren't here today, unfortunately. It's too early for Sean, and Yamama is, I think, traveling right now. But yeah, these Sean and Yamama were amazing in just helping me out, telling me what to do, and I honestly could not have gotten through this whole experience without them. So I just thought that this deserved to be here. Yeah, so as all of you probably know, we are in the middle of a pandemic right now, and because of this, this round of user studies was much different than the ones that were conducted in the past. And this was because I had to conduct every single study online. Now, obviously, this posed quite a few problems for me because the target audience is obviously underprivileged students. So there's a very small number of underprivileged students where I live that have access to mobile devices that have an active internet connection. So that really narrowed down the pool of students a lot. So obviously, the first question I asked myself is, where does one find children that meet this criteria? So fortunately, my family works with quite a few other families of like our maids. We have sponsored their kids' education and all of that. So through that, we actually did end up finding a few students that fit this age range and the criteria that we wanted. So they were. I'm grateful that they could help me out over here. So these are two students that. Two of the, I think, 5-6 students that I work with. The one on the left is 10 years old. He studies in a government school in Rajasthan, which is a state in India. And the one on the right is his younger brother, who is 7 years old, and he also studies in a government school in Rajasthan. And these are actually the only two photos I have, so I put them here. It was really hard for me to actually obtain photos of the other students, but this is what I have. So before I get started, I'll tell you guys about the actual process of the user study, as in exactly what I did for each student. So I first of all divided the study into 2 phases. So in phase 1, I had a pretest. Now, a pretest is essentially trying to figure out what the student already knows and what they have and what I think that they should be learning next. So we tried to choose topics for students that the student had no pre-knowledge in. So the topics that we had were place values, fractions, and multiplication. So what I did is that for each skill in each of these topics, I added a question to the pretest, and then according to the students' answers in the pretest, I would assign them a topic that they did not know. After the pretest, I made the students but go through the Oppia chapters. So I was actually doing this on call with them. So what we did essentially was we set up a Zoom meeting, and I asked them to share their screen while they played the lessons on their own device. And that was the maximum that I could really do as a facilitator. All that I was there to do was to help them in case they had some kind of confusion regarding the content of the lesson, but I would not actually teach them myself. I was mostly just there to fix translation gaps and just make them feel a bit more comfortable with the lesson. That was all that I had to do as a facilitator during this phase of the study. During this phase of the study, we also had milestone tests. Now, milestone tests are essentially, we take them after the student does, say, 2 to 3 chapters. Now, the milestone tests are used to test the effectiveness of the chapters. So for every single skill that is tested in the 2 to 3 chapters prior to the milestone test, we would add one question in the milestone test to see immediately, right after the chapter, how well the students understood the lesson. So this kind of eliminates the variables of time and, maybe they don't remember things after a while. This eliminates that because we're testing the skills right after the student studies them. And after all of the chapters are done, all of the milestone tests are done, we move on to revision cards. Now, the revision cards is actually something that we introduced in Oppia recently. So the prior round of Oppia student tests did not have these. So the whole aim was, after this student finishes all of their chapters, I would give them their revision cards to reiterate the concepts and make them understand them better. And after that, in order to test the validity of the revision cards, we had a post-test. So that was the process that I followed in phase 1. Now, phase 2, I had a similar pretest to figure out which chapters the students did not know and test them accordingly. After that, I had the parent guide. Now, the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 is that in phase 1, I was the facilitator, as in I was the one who was actively watching them do the studies and actively observing, making notes, figuring out what they know, what they don't know. In phase 2, a parent or guardian would do the same thing that I did. So I was not actively there watching them do the lessons, but instead we have a parent and teacher guide that kind of trains the parents to be able to do basically exactly what I did in phase 1. So you're testing the validity of the parent guide. That was the whole point of phase 2. So we gave the students the pretest, we figured out what topic that they would have to learn, and then we gave their guardian the parent guide. And we just told them to go through it and then facilitate the student while they did the rest of the parts of phase 1. So it was essentially the same thing, but I was not watching over them in phase 2. So as the study went on, I actually encountered quite a few obstacles that I was not expecting. I mean, I thought that things would go smoothly up until the end, where I would, figure out which lessons were faulty. But it actually turned out that a lot of lessons couldn't even be completed. Like, those were how significant that the obstacles were. First of all, update images. So this is actually interesting. So in place values, in the topic place values, all of the images that we had were in a vertical order. Now, how do I explain this better? So in place values, we have a table of like place values and then their values. So it would be like ones, tens, hundreds, thousands in a vertical order. Now, for some reason, that was not registering well with the students. So what I was doing as the facilitator was essentially writing down that exact table, but I did it horizontally. And for some reason, that sat better with the students. They were able to understand the table horizontally, but not vertically. And not just one student, both of them. So this wasn't something that I expected would happen, but it happened. So what I had to do is I had to update every single image of place values and make it a horizontal table rather than the vertical table. Now, secondly, restructure lessons. So taking place values as an example again, obviously the target audience for place values is quite young children. But the way that our rounding off lesson was in place values, it was very hard for a young child who's learning place values to be able to understand the techniques that were used in the rounding off lesson of that same topic. It was too advanced for a student who was learning place values. Like maybe a student who was studying multiplication or fractions may have the intellectual capability to understand what was going on in the rounding off lessons, but a student who was just learning place values, who obviously has no prerequisite knowledge of math, it was pretty hard for them to understand that at that time what we had in our rounding off lesson. So I had to restructure the entire rounding off lesson and make it a bit easier to understand for the student. I'm not going to go into detail of what I did, but I essentially, yes, I had to restructure the entire lesson and then redo the test, I think 2 or 3 times in order to make sure that, the new lesson was effective, which it was, but after like editing the entire thing. Now 3, split chapters. Yeah, so taking fractions as an example here, the end of the fractions lessons, the last 2 chapters were incredibly long. I think they took a student about 2 hours in one sitting. So what I had to do is I had to split them. After doing that, it was a little bit easier on the students, but yes, I did have to split the chapters because they were just incredibly long. So yeah, and conclusion. So I'll go in depth in the further slides, but right now in overview of exactly what happened after all the studies was, first of all, lesson effectiveness. So after fixing all of the issues that I encountered, that I just talked about, we did actually get significant results. I will be showing these in the later slides, but it's safe to say that the lessons actually were pretty effective. Now, the revision card effectiveness, we determined it either works, the revision cards either work if the student has prior knowledge of the topic and he or she is only doing the revision cards afterwards just to revise the lesson, or the student does all of the chapters, goes through them, and then does the revision cards. So the revision cards are not effective on their own if the student does not have prior knowledge of the lesson. That is also something that I found out during the study. Now, the parent or teacher guide effectiveness. This actually had to be worked on a lot because we did not tailor the parent or teacher guide according to phones. We made it according to a laptop. And obviously, with the audience that I was focusing on, these people did not have laptops. They were doing the studies through their phone. So that proved to be a pretty big obstacle when it came to the parent or teacher guide, because nowhere did we mention using Oppia through the phone. It was mostly laptop tailored. So that was also some kind of inclusivity that I had to add in the guide. Now, for place values. So this is a bar graph of two of the students that studied place values with me. So the hypothesis that I tested in place values is written here. So students who are only shown supplemental materials, who have prior knowledge of the topic, perform just as well as students without prior knowledge who are introduced to the supplemental materials as well as the interactive lessons. Now, I did this on student 2. So if you look at student 2's scores in the pretest, she has pretty significant scores. I think she scored about 8 out of 13 or 9 out of 13, which was much more than student 1 scored. So with this, I realized that she does have prior knowledge of the topic, and then I ended up giving her only the revision materials and then giving her the post-test, as compared to student 1 who had no knowledge of the pretest, no knowledge of the topic before, hence the low scores on the pretest. And then after doing the chapters, he had a slightly higher milestone test, and after doing the revision cards, he had an even higher post-test. So obviously the hypothesis is comparing student 1 with student 2. Student 1 who studied the lessons on their own and had no prior knowledge, and student 2 who had prior knowledge but only used their revision cards to reiterate her knowledge. So they ended up having quite similar, actually no, the exact same scores in the post-test. So this made me conclude, I mean not strongly conclude, but at least from this we can see that the lesson is not only effective, but also students who have prior knowledge and only go through the revision cards, it also helps them as well. So that's what I got to know from going through the place values lesson with the students. Now for multiplication. I actually did 2 hypotheses here. I have both of them written here. So the hypothesis tested with student 3 is essentially the same one that I tested in place values, but the hypothesis, one second. Yeah, so student 3, essentially what I did with student 3 was I gave student 3 the revision cards before the actual lessons. So normally the order that we chose to follow was pre-test, chapters, and then revision cards, and then post-test. But with student 3, I decided to switch up the order. I did pre-test, then revision cards, then chapters, then milestone test. I thought that we decided to test that maybe placing the revision cards before the rest of the chapter might result in the student having a bit higher understanding when it came to milestone tests. However, this was not the case because student 1 who did not read the revision cards versus student 3 who did read the revision cards before the milestone test ended up both having, I think, the exact same score on the milestone tests. So that kind of negated the hypothesis that we had that maybe showing the students the revision cards before they studied the chapter would help in some way, which it did not. Now, again, the same concept, the same hypothesis that we studied in place values, we also tested out with student 2 over here. She got a pretty high score in her pretest, and then we decided to not give her any of the chapters, just give her the revision cards and then test the post-test out. So even in that case, her score did improve. So hence proving that hypothesis as well. So from multiplication, we learned that it's not effective to introduce the revision cards before the chapters. Rather, it's more effective to introduce them after the chapter. And we also learned that the revision cards are a sufficient supplementary material for a student that already has knowledge of a certain topic. Now, for fractions, I did fractions on 2 students. Now, unfortunately, student 1 could only complete fractions until chapter 4 because student 1 did not have the prerequisites that were required in order to move on to chapter 5. Hence, the questions are only correct out of 6 over here because there weren't many chapters that we could actually compare this to because student 1 ended up stopping after chapter 4. Because he didn't really know multiplication and division, so we couldn't proceed further. Now, the hypothesis that I tested here is written over here. So when the students are shown supplemental materials after they complete their story-based lessons, their understanding and post-test scores are higher than if they didn't view the supplemental materials at all. Yeah. So as clearly so this was tested out on student 1. I did not show student 1 the supplemental materials before his post-test. So you can see how student 1 has a consistent performance between the milestone test and the post-test. But student 2 actually has an increased performance between the milestone test and the post-test. And this is because I showed her the supplemental materials. So I think that all the previous results that I got from this, as well as fractions, just kind of reiterates the fact that the supplemental materials are actually quite effective when it comes to helping the students revise. So yeah, that was again something that I found out through fractions, that the revision materials are actually quite effective. Now, some issues that I actually ran into that I think are things that we really need to deal with. First of all, students cannot sit still for more than 1 hour. And I think this is a really, really big thing that we need to take into account when making lessons, is that we need to keep them under 1 hour, because I noticed that as soon as the time limit exceeds 1 hour, the students get fidgety, they stop concentrating, and it's normally almost exactly after the 1 hour mark. I don't know if that's like a mental thing of theirs, or if they like look at the time and they're like, oh, it's been 1 hour, we need to get out of here. But generally, it's very hard to keep their attention for longer than an hour. So what I had to do actually for the fractions lessons that ended up being 2 hours long was, on the first day, I would go through the first 1 hour of the lesson. And Oppia has this issue where you can't pick up where you left off. So on the second day, what I would have to do is I'd have to go through the first 1 hour of content with them really, really fast. Like I would, they'd be on a card and I would tell them the answer, they would enter the answer, we'd go to the next card. I would tell them the answer, they would enter it, we'd go to the next card until we reached the point where we stopped the previous day. So almost every single time when a lesson was more than 1 hour long, we had to go through this entire process the next day to just get back to where we left off and then continue. So it was like an additional 15 minutes, I think, every second day. So yeah, that was definitely, I think, a huge, huge issue that the students did not enjoy. I did not enjoy. And yeah, I think that was probably one of the major, major technical things that I found during the study that should definitely be fixed. And secondly, students get distracted very quickly. This continues on with the first point, but I'm specifically talking here about notifications. So I was watching the students' screen through Zoom. Like, I was asking them to share their screen, and then I was watching them do the lesson. But I think sometimes they forgot that I was watching them or something, because as soon as they got a notification, they would click on it, and then I would see them like chatting with their friends, and I would just be sitting there waiting for like the next 5 or so minutes until, you know, they got off the chat, came back to Oppia, started again. So yeah, I don't know if this is something that a lot of students face, but I definitely faced it with mine. And that a solution that I would suggest to this would just kind of be figuring out how to do a do not disturb thing when Oppia is open. But again, I don't know how feasible that is. But this is definitely an issue that I found a lot, as students would just switch apps for 5 minutes and come back. So this definitely, it really hampers the flow of the lesson when, you know, your brain completely shifts to another topic, then you need to come back to a certain spot. It's kind of hard. Now, thirdly, students have difficulty following a longer than 1 minute voiceover. So again, Oppia does not have textual translations right now. We only have verbal translations, and a lot of the cards that have to be verbally translated are over like 100, 200 words. Okay, not 200, but like over 100 words long. So this ends up being quite a long voice recording. So obviously, when something is written down in text, it's easy to follow. You can read it multiple times, you can understand it. But when something is given to you in the form of a voiceover, all of the information just comes once, and then you just forget it. So that was an issue that the students were facing with the voiceover. They would have to like repeat it multiple times. Sometimes they'd have to listen to the same portion like 5 or 6 times just to understand what was going on, especially from more complicated questions in terms of like fractions and adding and subtracting fractions, that kind of thing. It was not easy for the students to actually follow such a long voiceover. So I think another issue that definitely has to be dealt with was just the fact that there are no textual translations, and it definitely hampered the students' entire experience. And another thing, connection issues are still an inevitable problem. So I actually encountered this quite a lot when I was doing studies, is that some days, say, the phone is out of battery, or some days, like, the 4G isn't working, or some of the other, issue kept happening. And thankfully, I was still able to complete my studies on time, but this actually happened more often than you think. I think at least 2 or 3 times a week. Now, again, I don't know how genuine this is, but it was definitely something that really hampered the progress in my studies. Now, I have a screenshot actually to the right, just one of the many instances in which I had to cancel the class. So here he's saying that he can't join today because his phone is out of battery and he's not getting electricity in his house. So yeah, this is definitely an issue that I dealt with doing virtual studies, and it's not something that can be fixed, but just maybe as a kind of warning to people who may want to do virtual studies in the future, is that this is going to keep happening, and maybe it's like genuinely, not the student's fault. Like, this is definitely an issue that will keep occurring again and again. So yeah, I just thought that I would include it here. Now, some things that I learned. First of all, students love illustrations. Specifically the picture on the bottom right. I think all of my students that ended up seeing this picture in, I think, one of the fractions lessons absolutely loved it. I don't know why. It was supposed to have a funny appeal that Matthew needs to learn fractions because he can't possibly draw like 260 circles or something like that. That was the pretense of this photo. And the students just enjoyed it. And not just this image, but just images in particular. I think they really, really significantly help the students more than we would think. And secondly, students are entertained by interactive questions. Now, in particular, here I'm talking about the drag and drop questions. I noticed that whenever any of my students came across a drag and drop question, they were genuinely excited that they got to do this, because multiple choice questions are something that you come across pretty often, that maybe in Google Forms or even in-person tests. Multiple choice questions are quite common, but drag and drop you hardly ever get to do, I think. So the students really, had a ball of that. So yeah, I think the drag and drop questions were definitely something that the students really enjoyed doing. And yeah, that is it actually. So if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I have a question, Riya.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, this is Angeli Fitch.
Hi.
My first time joining in. So I'm the one that provides the English voiceover. I have been volunteering for Oppia with Sean for over 2 years now. So I'm very familiar with all the lessons and all the cards. So I'm curious, with your studies, what's the percentage of the children that are hearing the lessons in the Hindi language or English, or what's the percentage of that?
So all of my students did in Hindi, so I actually had to make the voiceovers as the students progressed with the lessons. I had to do it myself. They all did in Hindi. They aren't really that fluent with English, so everything that took place here was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well then, because everything that I do is English voiceover, and I know that Sean gave me feedback that some of the kids who English is their second language, for me to speak slowly and clearly. And do you have any advice any suggestions for me? Because I'm telling I mean, I've done I've done so many different lessons, and I try to make it very kind of positive and keep the students engaged while speaking kind of slowly. Do you have any suggestions for me as the voice actor?
I think the enthusiasm in the voice really does have an impact on the students. I think the more interesting that you make it sound, the more interested they will feel. So I think the voice actor really has a huge part to play when it comes to lessons, just in general, in terms of raising their interest and all. But apart from that, yeah, I think going slow is definitely something that should be taken into account, because I did not take it into account for the first few lessons. And then I noticed that my students kept reiterating the voiceovers. Like, they would listen to one part and then they would go back like 5 seconds, listen to it again, go back 5 seconds. So I feel like if I spoke slower, then this might have not been an issue, might have still been an issue. But I think going slower definitely also helps with that.
Okay, and I've noticed that the main character, pretty much in 99% of the lessons that I've done, is always male.
Yeah, we're fixing that actually. So in the
that would be good.
Lesson, in the multiplication lesson, we do have a female lead. Her name is Riya. And I think we're working on that, because I saw in the overall spreadsheet tracker, we're actually keeping track of their genders now. So I think that's something that we're working on. But yeah, I noticed that as well. So,
I've done hundreds of the lessons, and but it's been fun. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
You're welcome. If anyone else has anything they would like to ask.
Riya, thank you so much for doing this. I'm newer to Oppia, so this is just phenomenal information. I did have a question about, you were saying that the kids were getting fidgety and after a certain number of time. Is there any correlation with the age of the children? Like, a 6-year-old is getting fidgety at a half hour and a 10-year-old is getting fidgety at an hour? Or is there any age range correlation to when they start getting fidgety?
I don't think it was an age-related thing, because I actually did on a variety of students. I had a 13-year-old, I had a 10-year-old, I had a 7-year-old, and I could not sit through more than 1 hour with any of them. They were male, female, different backgrounds. I think it's just a general thing with students. Again, it might have just been a coincidence. Maybe it was just my students, but they definitely had an issue with it being longer than 1 hour.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you again for all this information. It's really great.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have anything? I think that is all then. You can drop a text as well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Riya, for this wonderful presentation. I think all of us would have had something nice to learn from it. And it's nice to see that the work from both the tech community, the voice artists, the designers, the lesson creators, and all of that's actually been helpful for students.
Definitely has, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. If anyone has any questions, you can ask them now. Akshay has recorded the presentation, so we'll post it if you want to share it, or if you want to view it later. And we'll also circulate a form along with the recording, where if you have any further questions later, you can post that. And yeah, we will also take feedback in the form, so you can let us know how we can improve these sessions. What else would you like to hear from the Oppia community, and so on. Or if you would like to give a talk yourself, that's also amazing. So we would be happy to help host a talk for you. Sajal says thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, cool. Okay, this was actually the second talk in this series. So we had a very technical talk last time with Madhav, and we'll probably have one more talk sometime in the mid of October. So stay tuned. Some more exciting stuff coming your way.
Okay, thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you. Thanks all for joining, and see you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.